Greetings, America, and welcome back to episode 33 of Let's Talk. Or should we be a little more exact and say welcome back to episode 33 of Dan's video journal that he puts online? I don't know. We'll wait and see if I get any feedback. I know there's still a few people I'm in contact with that because of their employment situation or status, they haven't been able to take the opportunity to respond or reply, but I would still like to see people get involved in the conversation. So, it is currently the 22nd of April, 2 days away from my 17th wedding anniversary. That's right, 17 years ago, a woman much prettier than I deserve decided I need to have that for the rest of my life, and said I do. And that was her second opportunity. Her first opportunity was when I asked her to marry me, and she still got it wrong and said, yep, I need that for the rest of my life. And she was so convinced in that decision that she married me almost 17 years ago. It'll be 17 years ago Saturday. So look forward to celebrating that. Oh, so depending on how you live your life, I suppose it's semi to somewhat impossible to tune things out. Whether it's the conviction of Derek Chauvin out of Minneapolis, or the Columbus police shooting, or the recent police shooting here, I think it's fair to say it's probably extremely difficult to be a cop. Now, I just had an interesting conversation with a gentleman at the barbershop where I get my hair cut. Come to find out, he's still currently on active duty and he's with MARSOC, so typically they tend to do their very best to recruit some very bright and talented individuals. So, in theory, he's a talented and bright individual. But what I do know is he's a productive member of society. He's a patriot for serving his country. So, that being said, he and I clearly had different points of view on the whole Derek Chauvin thing, and yet we had similar points of view. We both agreed that the media, whether legacy or social media, and parts of society, to include celebrities, made this a racial issue or made it racially motivated and made this socio-politically charged when in essence, what you had was a criminal conducting criminal behavior. The cops responded, and unfortunately, the criminal lost his life while in the custody of police. And to the best of my knowledge, because I didn't watch it, because it just wasn't something I wanted to watch. My limited understanding is the argument was whether Derek Chauvin was directly responsible for causing the death or whether he wasn't. And I don't know what the arguments were, but apparently he was convicted on all counts of murder. So, for me, murder implies intent. Murder is a direct action taken against somebody with the soulful intent of killing somebody, which means in your heart of hearts, you had the intent of ending their life. And to be truthful, I don't know that. I don't know that Derek Chauvin was a murderer. I don't know that he had darkness in his heart, that he had malicious intent in his heart. I don't know. Um, is it possible he did what his training taught him to do? It's possible. Is it possible the training's flawed? Sure. Is it also extremely possible that police officers, especially police officers who identify as Caucasian and male for that matter, are in an extremely, almost impossible predicament with the current socio-political environment? I mean, you have elected officials like Maxine Waters calling for violence in the event that they don't get the verdict. As in, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Hey, jury members, I'm Maxine Waters. You better get this right or you know what's going to happen. And yet she's one of those that voted to impeach Donald Trump over the events that took place at the Capitol building, but yet she and so many others, Rashida Tlaib, the current vice president, and so many others who have made inflammatory remarks that have either been directly responsible for or coincidentally responsible for violence that has taken place across this country, and yet nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to want to accuse and convict them of anything. And it's just a sad status of affairs. Um, the gentleman from Marsoc getting his haircut did agree that Chauvin was guilty. Chauvin. He agreed that he was guilty and agreed that, he got the appropriate sentence, but he disagrees with all the other atmospherics and all the other what's the word I'm looking for? At the risk of sitting here babbling forever, basically the optics, the optics of how this appeared. If you can remove certain politically slash sociopolitically sensitive terminology, a criminal an alleged criminal, allegedly guilty of an offense while in police custody, died while in police custody. That's about as objective and as adjective free as it can get, with the right amount of adjectives added. And that's where he and I seem to agree, was that this thing took on a life of its own, and that Derek Chauvin more than likely did not receive a fair trial. And I've also noticed a handful of celebrities, because I have Instagram, which is both a blessing and a curse, to keep up with certain things. But while that may be the positive, the negative is if there's certain actors whose work you like and you want to know what's going on with their projects, or, spoilers or whatever the case may be, if they also happen to be heavily into current social trends, you got to put up with that. Dule Hill from Psych. I loved him as Burton Guster on Psych. I do not love his politics. Basically, he is of the mindset that in the year 2021, that all, and I mean 100% of all police, are essentially the modern day KKK, which I find interesting because the KKK was founded by the Democratic Party to be the militia wing of the Democratic Party. So, just that phraseology I find interesting. And he could not wait to post multiple pictures of Derek Chauvin, calling him a murderer, calling him this, calling him that, when I think there's a greater undertone that is at risk here. And not everybody's inclined to agree, and I'm more than willing and able to have these conversations. But whether Chauvin had a purposeful part to play or a negligent part to play, what upsets me is the precedence. And the precedence is that George Floyd, who was we never even discussed the part where George Floyd most likely broke the law. He passed 2 counterfeit $20 bills. He was given ample opportunity by the store clerk to come in and either return the cigarettes he'd purchased with the counterfeit bills, or or he could purchase the cigarettes with real money. In which case, he basically gaffed off the clerk, which therefore shows intent to commit a crime. And in the state of Minnesota, the city of Minneapolis, counterfeit money and or bad checks, whatever the case may be, is cause enough to call the cops. So the clerk gave Mr. Floyd ample opportunity to make good on this situation where he utterly refused. The cops were called. So the cops were called on Mr. Floyd for breaking the law. So at this point, Mr. Floyd is not a good person. He is not a good citizen. He is not a model American. He is not a productive member of society. And it went downhill from there. He was given numerous opportunities to comply with the police, and he did not. Whether or not that had anything to do with him being under the influence of narcotics or not, I don't know. If you really want to argue against their actions, then you could say, okay, the police need to be armed and or prepared to detain suspects whose mental status is impaired and are unable to comply and get into the back of a standard issue police cruiser. In other words, Mr. Floyd would have needed a larger vehicle to get into. And I've mentioned this before. This is not the first time I've said that. So this isn't anything new. If you're the one person who's seen my other videos, you know it's not the first time I've said that. So to fast forward, the precedence that is being set is essentially, if you're a cop, specifically a white cop, and then you could probably go one step further, a white male cop, you may have to screen all of the calls before you answer. Roger, I need to know, is this potentially a crime involving people of color? Okay, I cannot respond. I lack faith and confidence in the judicial system, and I lack faith and confidence in the police department and the city that I work for, that I will be treated fairly in the event that I show up and I do my job. Just look what happened in Columbus. If you see the body cam footage, another female was attempting to stab another female. Now, let's add some adjectives, since apparently those are extremely important in today's society. A black teenage female was attempting to stab another black female. When the officer showed up, who just happened to be white, coincidence or not, when the officer showed up, he got there just in the nick of time as the female with a butcher knife was on the backstroke, getting ready to forward thrust the butcher knife into the other female's body. In which case the officer used the appropriate force to stop a potential murderer from committing murder or homicide or assault and battery with the intent to kill. And instead, don't ask me why, but the reasonable thing to do by social media or legacy media was immediately run with the story that an unarmed black teenage girl was killed by a white cop in Columbus. That was the story that was first put out, immediately prompting the attention of celebrities like LeBron James and, of course, Dule Hill. But that was wrong, because the real story was a white cop saved another black woman's life by using appropriate force against an assailant. It just so happens the assailant was a teenage black girl. So, again, getting back to my concerns, where are we at? I mean, what is the overall theme? That white cops are not allowed to deal with people of color who are committing crime? People of color are allowed to commit crime? I mean, already we have riots and looting, and we have damage and death in major cities conducted by people of color and, well, I guess white people too. I mean, I don't know how we're classified. Are we clear? Are we lacking color? I don't understand. I'm pretty sure I have multiple shades of colors on me between body, hair, skin, the variations of skin pigmentation throughout my body, but I digress. It's the precedence that bothers me, because at this point, as a cop, I would begin to lose all faith and confidence in the justice system because of socio-political pressure, social media pressure, which more than likely had a hand in Derek Chauvin's trial. And whether he's legitimately guilty or not, in his heart of hearts, I think his best bet is to push for a mistrial. But if I was a cop, I would more than likely resign, in which case what's going to end up happening is the lawless mob will run ruckshot for a while, and then militias will form, and it will be ugly. It'll be ugly. It just goes back to the last video I made, the boy who cried wolf. You know, at some point, regular, everyday people are going to have to get involved and literally say enough is enough. I mean, it's already happening to some extent with celebrities. And I've mentioned this before. Sarah Silverman, who's a bleeding heart liberal and known for her being a comedian, she's already having issues with the cancel culture because it's an all or nothing type mob mentality. And she's having issues with the cancel culture, you know, which is just all part of this trend. And that's what upsets me, is when there's legitimate bigotry issues, racial issues, is will those get drowned out again? Because after this decade or more of just full retard, that we as a society are going to get tired of it, and then basically real racists are going to get allowed to get away with stuff because they're just waiting for their opportunity after society has literally had enough of targeting people for racism when it may not be racism. So then it's going to be like, oh, that's such a thing of the past. Same thing with sexual assault, or same thing with the whole intersectionality. The whole excessive celebration of the victim status. What's going to happen to real victims? All right, that's the problem I have with this. And there's just so, I don't know. I feel like I'm babbling because I'm disturbed and I'm angry, and I think a lot of us are too. And the last thing I want, and because this gentleman who's Marsoc, he really believes that we need to have some sort of justice reform and whatnot. And I think to some degree he's right. It would depend on what particular issues he's talking about. In which case, I reminded him the current president in the White House is directly responsible for the 1994 crime bill, which levied harsher sentences against people with drug offenses, which inadvertently had a direct impact on the black and brown community. So I'll just leave that at that. But I don't know, because he doesn't seem to think there will be a civil war. And I hope he's right, and I hope there's not a civil war, because unlike last time where you were literally above or below the Mason-Dixon, we no longer have a Mason-Dixon. I mean, literally within your own neighborhoods, you're going to have, for simple terms of conversation, people on the left and people on the right. And I hope it's not like that, but back in the Civil War, some people were just grouped in because of where they lived. So, if you put that in today's context, if you're somebody who agrees almost 100% with the right, but I don't know, some welfare policy or an abortion policy is something that's very near and dear to your heart, does that mean because of that one singular issue you end up, you end up fighting for the left? See, and I think that's a bad way to go, which is why I started this whole channel in the first place. Let's get together. Let's have these conversations. We don't have to agree. It's like I said, I enjoy Dule Hill's work, but when he takes to Instagram and he does all of his political posting, I typically disagree wholeheartedly. I do not agree whatsoever that in the year 2021, the third decade of the 21st century, it is as bad or worse as it was post-Civil War up until like the 1960s and 70s. I disagree. I mean, Mr. Dule Hill is a celebrity because of opportunities afforded to him that would not have been afforded to him if things were as bad as they were post-Civil War up to the 60s and 70s. But that's my opinion. It's mine alone. Nobody has to share in that opinion. But again, get involved. Message me. Leave a comment. Get a hold of me somehow. Let's have these conversations. Let's see how we can somehow meet in the middle and avoid, picking sides. Why don't we pick the ultimate side, which is the United States? Let's choose to be Americans versus left and right. But, once again, I'm just a heterosexual Caucasian male who wants to listen to me. Apparently one person does, because I average one view, so whoever that is, thank you. But you guys know the deal. Hit like if you like it, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, whatever the case may be. But more importantly, get involved. Leave a comment. Let's have these conversations. Talk to you later. Greetings, America. Don't mind the change of scenery. Just is what it is. I haven't finished putting together my last video, I think, which would be episode 33. Since that time, just things have happened. I haven't gotten a chance to finish producing the video and then publishing it, but I will as soon as I'm done making this. My anniversary is come and gone. 17 years married to my wife. Still wearing my Donate Life shirt since April is Donate Life Month. To kind of caveat off of some of the things that I said, there's been reports lately that record numbers of law enforcement officers are resigning or retiring, if allowed to, because of the current social and or socio-political climate.
there's been lots of talks to defund the police, social, justice reform, whatever the case may be, all these different talks. And yet, nobody's talking about sociological reforms, societal reforms. So the accusation is that an extreme minority of people who are charged with upholding the law are the problem, and that society is not. And this all comes from stuff like recent events, like George Floyd, who, by all accounts, was not a model American, was not a model citizen, was not a productive member of society. Um, the young woman in Columbus, who, and I will concede this, I don't know what prompted the violent action. I don't know if the cops happened to arrive while she was in the middle of attempting to defend herself. That is a logical and objective question to ask. Was she in the middle of defending herself against a woman to the point where she felt she needed the butcher knife to potentially inflict deadly force on said woman? I don't know the other age of the woman. I do know the other woman was black, of color, other than white. So essentially, the cop did save her life. Um, and you could argue things all day long, but nobody discusses ill-gotten behavior. And before this turned into some 30-minute long diatribe, think about it this way. For some of us of my age, let's say born in the 70s or earlier, and maybe even the early 80s, situation dependent, most of us may have had working parents, dual working parents, where we may have been latchkey kids. Um, but more importantly, what I remember is a sense of consequence. Many of us had a sense of consequence where we took ownership for what we did, and therefore, because we did, we had a sense of consequence within us. All right, there were certain lines we didn't cross. No, a lot of us did some deviant things, a lot of us did some stupid things, and a lot of us can rationalize, at a certain age, you just go through a phase where you do some pretty stupid stuff. But what I've noticed is a change in society where, you've seen that, and I've talked about this before, so it's not a new topic, but you've seen memes. Back in my day, I would get yelled at for my grades, where in today's age, the teachers get yelled at, as in we don't hold the students accountable. And at the risk of not being able to solidify this in a grandiose thought, one that's like, wow, what a gifted individual he is. Um, at putting myself at that risk, essentially what I've seen is I think we have a problem within society where there's a lack of concern, a general lack of concern for consequences, a lack of concern for one's behavior, and I think that's producing a certain attitude where we're trying to blame cops. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying every cop is perfect. I'm not saying cops are not racist. I'm sure there are some racist cops, and I mean in every way, shape, or form. Whites who hate other than non-whites, blacks who hate other than non-blacks, browns who hate other than non-browns, reds who hate other than non-reds. I mean, everybody seems to think that racism is a one-way street. It's white people versus everybody else. But it's not. Racism is open. All right? It's wide open. All racism requires is for basically an individual to despise or think less of and hold grudges and bigotry against another group on their immutable characteristics, skin color, ethnicity, whatever the case may be. So, and why don't we focus on that? We're at a point right now where it's like, well, because the larger white society had done this for so many years, so therefore these people can't be racist. So when black people say and do these things, it can't be racist. When brown people say and do these things, it can't be racist. And the list goes on. No, it's 100% racist. No matter how you slice it, it's always racist. It's 100% racist. But I digress. I was just recently watching a trailer for Steven Crowder, and it was all about the voter ID thing, where his stance was that claiming that minorities cannot get an ID is racist in and of itself. And based on the stance he was taking, I'm inclined to agree. The assumption is if you're non-white, if you're anything other than white, there is a system out there preventing you from acquiring an ID. Now, last I checked, if you had to get a new copy of your birth certificate, if you had to request a social security card, certain things that identify you as you being you, there may or may not be a financial transaction that has to occur between you and the government, which I understand if your finances are not as such where you can conduct a transaction. I understand that. I don't know that to be racially motivated. But you pretty much need an ID to do almost anything and everything else. The things that we take for granted, to buy alcohol, to drive a vehicle. So there's all these things you need a photographic ID for, but yet what people are ignoring is the reason why the Democratic Party wants to abolish voter ID. And it's specifically because what they want to do is they want to allow people who are here illegally. And you can raise your hands in a fit like, oh my God, I can't believe he's going there. See, the term illegal means you entered the country by less than legal means. That's what makes it illegal. No, they're migrants, or they're this, or they're that. No, they're good people. Well, they may be good people minus the fact that they entered the country illegally. The 1 and 2 can be the same. You can still be a good person, however, you still broke the law to get into the country. But I digress. The other thing with not requesting voter ID is depending on the state and the voting laws within the state, you may not have to be on file, in which case you can go to multiple districts or multiple voting centers and vote more than once if the state doesn't have a method of keeping track of who you are and how many times you voted. All right? The whole purpose of voter ID is to ensure the sanctity of our voting, to make sure that our voting is 100% fair. And because of all this COVID and the mail-in and the lack of IDs, yes, Donald Trump and several people who supported him and potentially the Republican Party had severe and serious questions over the legitimacy of the previous election. Because, in my personal opinion, I get it. You didn't like Trump. No problem. I don't know anything about Joe Biden or Kamala Harris that is likable. From a political standpoint, policy standpoint, I don't know anything about them that is likable. I almost find it unbearably embarrassing that Joe Biden is our president just because of his, and God forbid, his possible dementia and whatnot. And what I also further despise is the legacy media double standard. But again, we need to have these conversations, all right? The video I just made that I still have to publish, I talk about, a discussion I had with somebody at a barbershop where clearly we disagreed on certain topics, but, I'm not going to devalue the person. I'm not going to dehumanize the person. I may disagree on certain things, but, clearly he and I were engaging in a conversation which was good, and neither one of us were like, oh, you're a piece of crap, you don't deserve, the DNA you possess. And I think that's where we need to get in America. So with that, I'll close this. I'll get to the publishing part, and I'll post these videos. And the one person of you who views these, I appreciate that. But please do me a favor, get involved, leave comments, let's have these conversations. Hit like if you liked it, hit subscribe if you want to know when I'm doing more of these, and hit the notification bell when I post. Talk to you later.